We are back. Season 7, episode Live? Season 7, episode 5, Fluttershy leans in. This is an episode entirely devoted towards Fluttershy trying to make a sanctuary for the animal critter likes. And, you know, shenanigans. And then success. Yeah, it's just kind of a... goes back. Point being... that's the episode structure. I can see why I barely remembered this episode, to be completely honest. This is not super great. Angel is apparently a Ubisoft rabbit, enjoying the kind of idea of parkour. Apparently they have a whole Ponyville parkour section, which... yeah, that's actually pretty cool. I'd be down for that. Obstacle course even looks pretty fun. Maybe that should be like a video game, like a parkour video game where you play as a rabbit and you have to rush through things and be like... So they go to the veterinarians, and the door is stuck. Now, I'm going to talk about this for a little bit, and I do apologize, but they make a point of the fact that the door is stuck several times, and they never actually explain it. So, why is this a point of this episode? Is the door locked? Was the door jammed? Was the door just badly built? I know what you're thinking. Oh, well, it's obvious, Laura. It was stuffed with animals. No. First of all, the pony Fauna, Miss Dr. Fauna, had no problem getting to the door and opening the door. And second of all, while there are quite a few animals there, they were not enough to block the way. And third of all, the door swings inwards. So if it was so crammed with animals that the door can't open, it would be a door that swings outwards, right? And it would be bulging, but instead it's a door that swings inwards and has plenty of room to do so, so that doesn't track. So why do they make such a point about the door being stuck? It's like they were like, oh shoot, we need the cold open to be like 40 seconds longer. The door's stuck. Okay, we're good. And they just do that, and then they move on from it, because they apparently have absolutely no idea what to do with the scene. Anyways, so then they get in, woo, and this is when we have to talk about how, like, I enjoy the world building of this series a lot, actually, but this is where the world it's there's a thing I've noticed a lot in fiction, in almost all of fiction. I should probably come up with an official lorium for it, because it's when they don't think about it. It's when something is the way it is, specifically because the writers and creators didn't think about it. Now, I don't mean like negligently, I mean deliberately, like they just say, no, we're not dealing with that. Like the nature of the transporters in Star Trek is a perfect example, where the writers have repeatedly just been like, nope, and just walked away from the topic entirely, even though the transporters are one of the most insane inventions known to history. Or like a decent chunk of Pokemon is another good example of this. In this case, it is the gradient and degree of sentience and sapience of animals within the setting. Now, if you asked me, immediately prior to today, do animals have sentience and sapience within MLP? My answer would be, of course they do. Like, I wouldn't even think that that's a question. There is so much evidence for the fact that they do. Ignoring the fact that they have the ability to interact with, the obvious sentient and sapient ponies without any difficulty, they also can and do communicate with them regularly. Angel is a perfect example of this, despite being a bunny, which specifically violates the no hooves, no sentience rule, which is actually a rule, apparently. The bunny, Angel, nevertheless, has more than the capacity to understand complex topics like, for example, being late for an event, which goes all the way back to Season 1. We can also mention that cows and sheep, again, back in Season 1, have no problem talking in English to other ponies. So you don't even need Fluttershy's gift to understand animals to know that. But even if you take into account that Fluttershy has the gift of communicating with animals, that still means animals can communicate in language, in full discussion, right? The reason I emphasize that point is there's gradients of communication, right? Being able to say, stay away via a specific scent or a specific pose is different than being able to say, So you see, the Hooffields and the McColts have been feuding and fighting for several years and giving all this backstory and all the complex topics that are involved in that an animal basically can't understand. The mere fact that they have demonstrated such communicative ability by itself clearly and obviously means they're sentient sapient to me. Then we get to this episode. And I was doing a little research for this, as I often do, and I found out that they had a specific rules. No hooves, no sentience or sapience. Okay, ignoring the fact that that obviously flies in the face of everything that I just said, there's a giraffe in this episode, who clearly is being portrayed as just an animal. Except even the animals, as portrayed as just animals, clearly have a degree of intelligence that is beyond simply being an animal. And this is what I mean by not thinking about it. Deliberately not thinking about it. They don't want to design that, so they just move it off into the corner and leave it be. So anyways. Transporters, right? So Angel's a dick to Dr. Fauna. But he doesn't piss me off as much as that bear. Can I just punch? I mean, okay, I shouldn't punch a bear, because then a bear will maul me to ever-living death, and I will wish I died in the first few seconds. But still, maybe if I had like a giant gun or something, then I'd punch the bear and then shoot it. Because that bear is a total asshole this entire episode. Like, it's like he interacted with Angel, and it was just like, no, I am pure evil. Just like that. Anyways, so, whatever. Let's talk about the next point here. Ponies in this setting have mastery over their environment. We've talked about this many times. It's shown up many times. They schedule the weather. They actually are involved with regulating the animal's hibernation cycles. They're the only reasons that crops grow, since stuff doesn't grow by itself, etc., right? I bring that up because their regulation of the environment also includes fauna, animals. As I just mentioned, we actually have talked about that, where they actually regulate how the animals sleep and all that fun stuff. And yeah, it doesn't show up as often, which is a shame, because I still think it's one of the better world-building concepts of the setting, but I'm going to presume that it's still true and it hasn't been retconned yet. I mean, they do still talk about scheduling weather, so I'm assuming it's still a thing in the background. The reason I bring this up is, given the fact that they control the environment, it would make sense that this kind of escalation of animals slowly flocking more and more to the ponies would actually make sense over time, right? Because animals can communicate, because animals are sentient and sapient. It makes perfect sense that the animals would be like, oh yeah, by the way, the beaver back in season 2 or 3 was able to communicate with Fluttershy in like a cussing manner. That's another sign of sentience for you. Anyways, just occurred to me there. So it makes more sense that over time more animals would gravitate towards the ponies, towards where the ponies are, towards their territory, right? Because that's where we're taken care of. Otherwise, we have to fend for ourselves out in, non-equestrian territory, right? Why is this being weird? There we go. Apologies, my mic was being weird. So we have to, it makes sense, and then you're probably thinking, well, hang on, why is this only a problem now? And that's true. That's the first thing that occurred to me. Why is this only a problem now? You'd think this would be the kind of thing that ponies have been dealing with probably for generations. But then another thought occurred to me. I've talked before about how plot holes, in my mind, are not a binary thing. It's more like how many hoops you have to jump through in order to explain it, right? In this case, I think we can explain this away with a single hoop. All you have to do is presume that right now and here, so it's specific to Ponyville, and it's specific to the time that this episode happens, there's only one actual veterinarian, Miss Fauna. And that's it. The reason this is significant is because I have the feeling that in previous and in future times and in other locations, they have more than one. They have more than one pony that can take care of the situation, so they don't really have this kind of a problem. The animals don't just kind of, get stuck in, right? That's just my take on that. I don't know exactly. It does kind of make you wonder if, there's something else going on. But let's be honest, given the fact that this episode has a lot of deliberately not thinking about it, it's entirely possible that this is just, them not thinking about it. Moving on, this then leads to, speaking of another thing that they didn't think about. So Rainbow has already achieved her ambition. Cool. Rarity has already achieved her ambition. Cool. They were the only two who really had ambitions. Like, others have had kind of ambitions, but not really. So now in this episode, we find out that all along, Fluttershy has had an ambition she's never mentioned before, and to my knowledge, will never mention again. So that's neat. Hang on. No, we still got 102 minutes zacked out. Make me check here. Yeah, AJ achieved hers before the show started, so... Now, yeah, this isn't exactly an ambition. The point I'm trying to make here, forgive me, I'm kind of being negative on this episode because this episode kind of sucks. But the point I'm trying to make here is that this is the kind of thing it would have been cool to at least mention. You don't have to do a whole episode leading up to it, although that would be nice. But, they could have just had this thing be a background element periodic where she's like, I mean, all the animals are here and safe. I just kind of wish they had a place to go other than my house. And that's it. Just have like that one line or something like that periodically throughout the show to have this be kind of a background idea and a background element until this episode where she's finally gained, the self-worth and courage in order to actually be able to say, I've got it. Sanctuary. Obviously, this is not an idea that just came out of nowhere. She's been putting together this dream board for some time now, right? But because there's absolutely no build-up, it's hard to be like, woo, because there's no build-up. So it deflates the episode, you know what I mean? Which is another thing against its favor. Thank you very, very much, Loner. As always. I will put that towards Dealer's Choice. A.K.A. Mega Man! Wait, where did I play Mega Man? So that sucks. Moving on. Let's see. So the 5 are like, yeah, no, we'll totally help you. All we could do... That's another thing they could do. They could say her house was the original sanctuary and then shift it. Oh, that's a good idea. So the 5 are like, I've got it. We'll call in the experts. All right. There's an intended Aesop here that I think kind of sucks, if I might be so bold. But I'm going to save that for later. Don't worry, I won't forget. I put a note in my notes about it. Either way, what we see here is the relevance of vetting. This is kind of how vetting works. And again, I'll talk about that in a minute. Side note, considering the fact that they have environmental control, you'd think they would already have a sanctuary of some kind. Right? Again, this is where, like, Imperial Star Destroyer's idea makes perfect sense. Maybe they did have a sanctuary. I mean, Fluttershy lives in a freaking tree, for God's sakes, right? Whatever, moving on. So the 3 experts are like, all right, let's make this thing. And their response is basically, and that's the expert's reaction to her relatively mundane requirements. Now, up until now, the episode has just been kind of boring and badly designed, but this is when the episode starts to drift into negative territory for me. The moment the 3 experts kind of go, and clearly show a, wow, you clearly haven't thought this out, you're terrible and dumb, Fluttershy, attitude, when that is demonstrably not the case. So, first point, the customer gives super vague instructions, right? Okay, no, that's valid. That's a real problem. Sometimes people give really vague instructions, especially customers. Speaking as someone who has done a lot of work with customers with regards to, writing or designing a website or drawing or putting together a 3D model or whatever. I've done that kind of work before. I don't know how many of you have, because that's not super common. But that's the kind of work I've been involved with since I was in school, right? So it's really common, and it is extremely normal the customer has no idea what they want. And they ask for changes constantly, and that's just a whole irritation, right? And it feels like that's the direction they're going with the episode. Then they cut to black, and then they come immediately back to her giving very specific instructions on exactly what she wants. So that point is immediately torpedoed. She is not being super vague, and she isn't unsure of what she wants. She knows exactly what she wants, and indeed what she wants is a complex solution rather than a simple solution, which I'll talk about later. So that sucks. Okay. This then leads to the construction pony. I didn't bother writing down their names because screw them. Trying to convince her against her ideas. Now, that's actually fine. That's kind of to be perfectly blunt, that is the expert's job. I'm pretty good with both audio work and graphics work, right? I've done a lot of work with that, again, since I was like 14. So if you came to me and said, I want this image and I want it to look like this, in my opinion, it is my job as the expert to say, what do you think about this? Maybe this would work better. How do you like this idea? To give you feedback, to be your advisor. Now, that's all fine. And so far I'm like, okay, this is cool. The episode's catching me again. This then immediately leads to her saying, no, I don't want that. I want this. At which point, the expert's job is to say, okay, then I will work on this. This is then immediately followed by the construction pony saying, nah, we're going to do my thing. She'll like it better. I mean, there have been some long and brutal corporate lawsuits over basically this exact same concept over the years. Where Company A is like, we want this, and Company B is like, no problem, and then they do something completely different. And then Company A sues them for it, because Company B still wants to be paid for the work that they did. You get the idea. Then they repeat that scene 2 more times. This is, I would actually say, probably the weakest moment of the episode, just because they just repeat those same beats with all 3 of the ponies. I have nothing new to say about it. It's the exact same beats. This is what I want. Oh, but what about this? No, this is what I want. Okay, I'm going to do this. And they just repeat and then repeat. So moving on. I do have to point out, actually, I do have one thing to say. I'm looking for something less like a cage and more like a nice hug. I just like that quote. I just had to share that because that's a great quote. So then they get pretty far into construction before Fluttershy even notices what's going on. Okay. I don't know how much time passes here. They mentioned they were building rather quickly, so maybe it's not that long. So this is something that yeah, it's a very Fluttershy quote, I agree. This is something that I imagine most of you will not be with me on. Fluttershy has to really build herself up to saying that she doesn't like it. It takes her a moment, and she has to build up the effort to do so. Now, that's very Fluttershy. It's also very me. I really don't know how many of you out there actually sympathize with this concept. Let me try to explain what I mean. It's a form of politeness. I actually have a hard time flat out telling someone that they suck or that they failed at something. Like, it's difficult for me to do that. Let me give you a very mundane, everyday example of what I'm talking about. I have sometimes ordered something, food at a fast food restaurant or an actual sit-down restaurant, and they've given me the wrong food. And as long as it's not something I literally can't eat, which actually has happened, what instead I tend to do is just kind of live with it. Like, well, okay, I don't want to bother them. It's not a huge deal, right? Or yeah, like you get a bad haircut, and it's like, well, it's nice. It's not what I wanted, and it's not what I had, but, thanks. Still gonna tip them, right? Like I said, I don't know how many of you can sympathize with this exact point, because I feel like this is something that's just me, because I'm super polite, because I hate rudeness, but that's... I totally felt Fluttershy on that moment. And then, of course, she had to then work herself up to be like, all right, no, this is not what I wanted. This is not what I asked for. And I can't believe I'm saying this because I've also been in Weeout's shoes on this particular point. But I'm completely with Fluttershy on this. Because the thing is, again, remember the specific beats. This is what I want. How about this instead? No, this way. Okay, right? You gave the feedback. They stuck with it. Then you ignore their feedback and give the thing they don't want. And that's already bad, But then they really crossed the line because they actually try to blame her. They don't own up at all. Like, they don't apologize. There's no contriteness. There's no, oh, I'm sorry. Instead, it's just, well, look, I totally did what you want. I mean, we used the trees, and I put pillows inside the cages. We did what you wanted. And then they straight up blame her by saying, maybe your vision, I actually wrote down what it is, maybe your vision wasn't all it was cracked up to be. This is the exact moment the episode drifted into blue territory for me, by the way. I mean, this is weak sauce right here. This is just pouring some weak sauce all over this, because the way they do this is just awful. It's worth noting, this is one of those situations, because I don't like to criticize without critiquing, that it would be relatively easy to fix. For example, maybe make it so that what Fluttershy actually... Because there's two directions they could have gone with this. They could have made it so that Fluttershy really didn't know what she wanted, which is the thing where, you know, that the episode, you know, the seeming point of the episode could have actually been okay, but instead isn't. And so it could have been the idea that Fluttershy's idea didn't really work, and so she needed to compromise and bend in order to make what she wanted to happen, and they were trying to help her with that, blah, blah, and they could have gone that direction with it, which they obviously didn't. Instead, and I'm actually with Echt completely on this, it feels like what they wanted was just straight up for Fluttershy to have a moment. Fluttershy needed to stand up for herself, so they artificially created, let's call them what they are, bad guys, for her to be able to stand up to herself in. The fact that they're not running around with Nazi masks on shooting people does not prevent these three ponies from being bad guys, because that's what they are. They are bad guys in the construction of the narrative, in the construction of the episode. So, she stands up to them. Now, I have a note here. I wrote this down here. I'm just going to quote myself word for word. Note, S.A. Ross likes this episode because Fluttershy stands up for herself in the face of the rules they are violators. Was I right? I didn't say antagonist or villains. These are bad guys. Bad guys have no depth to them. That's the point of a bad guy. You're not supposed to think about it. They're not antagonistic to the story or the protagonist. They're not on opposition to you. They're not evil. They are bad guys. You don't have to think about it. They're just the opposite. They are wrong. They lose. And we feel good because they have lost. These are bad guys. Yeah, by the way, I'm strongly leaning towards blue for this episode. I'll hear people's thoughts on that, but we'll get to that in a minute. So then we have some shenanigans. Gotta have some shenanigans. I don't have anything to say about that. It's just, you know, woo. And like Echt says, this whole... It reminds me a lot of Voyager. I hate to parallel to Voyager. One of the things Voyager was really did too often, actually Enterprise, early Enterprise does this too, is they started with the idea Janeway is right. And so they would construct their narrative in such a way that Janeway is right, without actually earning it. You know what I mean? Rather than making it so Janeway actually is correct in her decision and choices, they start with the idea that she's right and mold the universe around it. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but both Voyager and Enterprise do this several times with this idea. And that's exactly what this feels like. Fluttershy is right, so let's twist reality around to make her right. Now, she invites the five over, and they're over like, hey, yeah, we'll totally help. And I've got it. And of course, the first thing they do is they immediately come up with all their old ideas, including the only one I really wrote down, a library cave. Wouldn't the books get all like musty and dirty? And anyways, whatever. So then she has to put her hoof down again, and Big Daddy McCold shows up. I'll admit that got a smile out of me. In fact, that's actually getting a continuity plus with him showing up, which brings us to 200 now on the continuity counter. I'm going to update over here. By the way, fun fact, an episode of Lorecraft has a Big Daddy McColt reference in it. Not that most of you probably watch that, I just thought I'd point that out because it amuses me. Anyways, so they go and they make it, and there's a montage, and it's cool. And while I was watching the montage, I was looking up the actress who plays Cheerilee, aka Miss Fauna, aka Celestia. she plays a lot of roles, but the two that really jumped out at me is, one, she is in StarCraft II Legacy of the Void as a Tal'Darim Protoss. Now, if you don't know what that means, she plays a villain. In fact, she plays what is effectively an evil, stupid Sith. So I want you to picture that, her voice being like, and then I will rip the bones from your mirror, just that kind of a thing, right? And you're probably thinking, oh, that's just a one-off thing. So in 3 separate Warhammer 40k games, she plays a Farseer, one of the Eldar, who does the same kind of thing. You fools must die, and... Anyways. So let's get to the Aesop, shall we? Because that's all I got left. Now, the intended Aesop is obvious. The customer is always right, which is stupid. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But the intended Aesop is dumb. Anybody who's ever worked with customers knows that the customer is not always right. That is a total load of crap. Now, it's not like the customer is always wrong. This is a more complex situation than that. But to take such a simplistic take on something like that is just eye-rolling, right? And they're, as was pointed out earlier, they're quite ambitious about it. I'm so sorry, Grafgard. Don't do it! Don't give in! So that's already irritating. But what amuses me is they have 2 unintentional Aesops here, which I don't think they even meant to. So the first is the concept of vetting. Now, for those of you not really familiar with that, let's assume... I'm trying to think of an example that applies to someone in chat. And I don't think anyone's present that I could really use like this. So I'll pretend, S.A. Ross, pretend you're into fashion, okay? So, well, add that in the episode kind of sucks, Lord Harriman. They didn't think about the world building. There's nothing really interesting or engaging, so there's no positives present. They use bad guys as a narrative tool for no good reason, and the Aesop is ambitious and bad. So you start at 0 and then you go down, 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 down. So yeah, that's why that's blue. Just believe. Yeah, they even say it. Just believe in your dream, and when you get there, it'll look awesome. No. Anyway, so pretend you're a fashionista, Ezra. Sorry, let's get back to the topic. So let's assume for a moment that Mr. Red comes to me and says, "Lore, I want your opinion on this fashion thing." Now, I actually, for those of you who know, I am actually a little bit of a fashion geek, as most video game players are to some extent or another. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, no problem. You know what? S.A. Ross is pretty cool. Like, he knows fashion. Go ahead and check him out. That's vetting. So what I mean by that is Mr. Red trusts my opinion. I trust S.A. Ross's opinion. Ergo, the vetting is branching these two, so now Mr. Red effectively trusts S.A. Ross's opinion. The problem is, vetting is actually something that should be a far more complicated, far more thought-out process than it is, because most people don't think about it at all. They just think, oh, I like them, and they know what they're talking about, so you deal with them instead. And, you know, that's exactly what happens in this episode. Oh, I'll get you in touch with this other person. But they don't actually think about that. The problem is, what I value and what Mr. Red values are different. This is true. We've actually talked about this topic before in a different format with regards to trust. You know, if Mr. Red trusts me and I trust S.A. Ross, that does not mean Mr. Red trusts S.A. Ross. And the further you go down that line, the less likely it is that Mr. Red trusts that. You know, if Ross trusts Harriman, trusts Ect, then the odds that Mr. Red trusts Ect are almost 0 at that point, because you're drifting too far down the line, right? Same thing with vetting. Now, vetting is still a good thing, doing it properly. If I actually sat down and thought, I was like, okay, well, Mr. Red wants something to do with this. And I know he's specifically thinking hats. Now, S.A. Ross doesn't really do hats. But I do know that Lord Harriman is really big into hats. And he's doing this whole thing right now with leather. So you know what? I'm going to redirect Mr. Red to Lord Harriman. That's proper vetting. Actually thinking about it and connecting you to the person that's actually going to help out with the situation, right? That's not what they do in this episode. They just do the simple concept. Oh, well, I know this person, so he'll help. Oh, I know this person, so she'll help. Now, this could also be just a circumstance of people value different things and they couldn't have known. That is also a possibility, and would also make this episode better if they were doing that deliberately. If that was the intentional Aesop of sometimes we want to, sometimes we vet someone who we really do think is going to be good for the situation, and they're not because life is complicated, that would actually be a decent Aesop in my opinion. It's not, and again, this is very clearly and obviously not intentional, so the episode doesn't get credit for that. But that leads me to the next unintended Aesop, which is simple solutions versus complex solutions, which the episode also doesn't earn, by the way. Here's the idea. Let's assume for a moment that a customer comes to you. Pretend for a moment that they're not terrible. I know that's a stretch. And let's say the customer comes to you and says, I really want a sanctuary. Let's just use the actual example. Let's say you're an architect or something. They're like, hey, I want this sanctuary. And they give you specifics, but it's specifics about ideas. Like, I want there to be a fence, and I want to use the trees, and I want there to be water, and it needs to be open. And you're thinking like, okay. Now, the simple solution there is to just do what you know. To just lean on the thing you know how to do and not actually try to make this work. The complex solution is to listen to this and think, okay, well, how can I make this work? And again, this is why I think compromise could have worked. Weods has mentioned twice now the idea of maybe each pony could have had a different problem. I think this would have been a good direction to go in with regards to each pony having a different problem, rather than them just ignoring her and dealing with it. Or maybe each time they're like, okay, well, we want to make this nice and open, but we're going to have issues whenever it rains, and this is going to there's going to be water collecting here, and this grass won't grow on this kind of terrain unless we do this over here. So, and so that's a problem now, right? That's something that has to be solved, and they have to come up with some kind of complex solution in order to make this work. And again, the compromise concept could have been brought in here, and it's like, okay, so we want to have places for them to rest and nest into. Well, okay, well, we can't just have beds out there. Those are going to disintegrate out in the wild without someone to care for them inside of like a week, right? So maybe we could try to shape portions of the terrain, or how do we do this? But we want there to be like hammocks. How do we make hammocks? Well, maybe we make the hammocks out of different material, and so forth and so on, right? And yeah, exactly. That's exactly right, Weods. Show some collaboration between Fluttershy and the experts to show them trying to actually solve the problems on display, rather than the experts completely ignoring her and charging ahead with something that she explicitly said no to. And yeah, having Flutter stressing out over this would have been a nice thing, because, and you're probably thinking, well, Lore, what's the Aesop then? The Aesop is complex solutions. You have a dream. You can't just make that dream happen, which is what they do in this episode, by the way. You gotta work at it. And then you work at it, and it's hard, and it's difficult, and it's trying, and then you succeed. You can't, this MLP is better than real life, so in MLP, you succeed, right? That would be the Aesop in that case. Plus, obviously, the things about, you know, collaboration and working with the customer, and the customer working with the expert, you know, both perspectives there. Speaking of someone who's been a customer and an expert, you know, a little bit of a give and take there would have been nice. Yeah, exactly. You think Rarities just suddenly became successful? No, she's been building up to that for seasons, for God's sakes. That's all I got. This episode kind of sucks. I can see why I didn't really remember this one. So, if anyone wants to argue me up from blue, I am listening. But as of right now, this is a blue episode to me. It's not interesting. It's not entertaining. It had like 2 moments that made me smile in the entire episode. I can't even remember them right now. And like I said, it started at 0, excuse me, not a negative. And then it kept screwing things up, you know. Yeah, this is going on the skip list, absolutely. Like, there are episodes more egregiously bad. See, I can't give her credit for that, SRS, for the reasons already mentioned. It's like giving credit to Janeway for being right. I can't give you that credit because you didn't earn it. You know? That's my take on it anyways. I was right, though. I wrote it down in my notes. I could prove it. I could copy paste it and be like... I mean, maybe blue is a bit harsh, but I can't imagine this being above blue. That's the thing. This happens occasionally in my Trek episodes, too. There's an episode which isn't, like, overtly, obviously bad, but at the same time, when I really sit down and analyze it, it is just bad. You know, and that occasionally there were some lamentations that surprised me. I was like, wow, this is not good. Huh. Transfigurations is a good example of that over in TNG. I'm sorry. Good effort, S.A. Ross. But like I said, I can't give credit for that. I'm gonna just mark it as blue. Blue. There we go. Whoops, that's dark blue, not that one. There we go. Regular blue. There we go. Sorry, GM Barrow, who's only written 2 episodes. The one where Pinkie Pie knows, which was actually orange. And then this one. Next episode is Forever Philly. This is by the Michael P. Fox / Will Fox duo. They've been all over the place. They gave us The Gift of Maud Pie, which was awesome, Applejack's Day Off, which was boring, and Pony Point of View, which was average. So we literally have the range with them. So this should be interesting. We will see what we think of it in about 25 minutes.